Cop arrests black judge for no significant reasons during a routine traffic stop, but what happens next shocks him and leaves him dumbfounded. The evening air was tense as 3 police officers surrounded a black Mercedes-Benz on Cedar Grove Avenue. The setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the suburban street, where the occasional flutter of curtains betrayed the watchful eyes of neighbors. Officer Mike Reynolds, a 15-year veteran, had his hand firmly gripped on his holster, his knuckles white with tension. His partner, Officer Amanda Torres, and rookie officer Brian Walsh flanked the vehicle on either side. Reynolds' face bore the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much and learned too little. 15 years on the force had etched permanent lines around his mouth, deepened by years of scowling at what he considered suspicious behavior. His badge gleamed in the fading daylight, a symbol of authority that he'd come to view as a shield rather than a responsibility. "I said get out of the car, now," Reynolds barked, his voice echoing through the quiet suburban street. The command carried years of unchallenged authority, the tone of someone used to immediate compliance. The black woman inside the vehicle, wearing a simple black top and her hair styled in a sleek bob, slowly raised her hands where they could be seen. Her movements were deliberate, practiced, the kind of careful choreography that shouldn't be necessary, but experience had taught her was essential. "Officers, I've shown you my license and registration. I've answered your questions. There is no reason for—" "Out! Or we'll remove you ourselves!" Reynolds cut her off, yanking the driver's door open with unnecessary force. The hinges protested with a metallic screech that seemed to underscore the violation of the moment. She stepped out with a deliberate calm. Her movements were measured and precise, like a dancer performing a routine she wished she never had to learn. Her heels clicked softly against the asphalt, each step a study in controlled dignity. "I demand to know the reason for this escalation. I've broken no laws." Reynolds grabbed her right arm roughly, while Torres seized her left, both spinning her around with unnecessary force. Torres's grip betrayed a moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt quickly suppressed by years of training and conformity. "Resistance, that's all I needed." Reynolds growled as they twisted her arms behind her back, his breath hot with the exhilaration of power unchecked. "Stop resisting!" Torres shouted, though the woman wasn't fighting back. The words were a practice script, a shield against conscience, protecting officers from the reality of their actions. Together, they forced her to the ground, Reynolds pressing his knee into her back while Torres held her shoulders down. The gravel bit into her cheek as Reynolds snapped the handcuffs around her wrist, the cold metal biting against her skin. Neighborhood residents began emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame. Cell phones raised in trembling hands, recording devices becoming silent witnesses to another instance of justice gone awry. Some stood with hands over their mouths, others whispered urgently into their phones, and a few brave souls stepped closer, their presence a quiet protest against what they were witnessing. Walsh stood guard, trying to keep the growing crowd at bay, but his young face betrayed his internal struggle. Fresh from the academy, he witnessed the stark difference between training room ideals and street-level reality. His hand rested uneasily on his belt, caught between protocol and principle. "You're hurting me," the woman stated calmly, despite the officer's weight pressing her into the pavement. Her voice carried a strength that transcended her physical position, each word measured and precise. "This is completely unnecessary and unprofessional." "Shut up," Reynolds snapped, pressing harder as if trying to crush her dignity along with her body. "You people never know when to be quiet." "Officer Reynolds," Walsh's voice wavered, carrying the uncertainty of youth confronting ingrained prejudice. "Maybe we should—" "Shut it, rookie," Reynolds barked, his face flushed with the color of authority challenged. "This is how we handle people who don't know their place." The woman remained surprisingly composed, despite her position on the ground. Though pressed sideways against the pavement, her eyes held a knowing look, the gaze of someone who had seen this script before but from a different angle. "You're making a grave mistake," she said, her voice steady and clear. One you'll soon regret. Just 30 minutes earlier, the black woman, federal judge Maya Thompson, had been carefully adjusting her robe in front of her bedroom mirror. The elegant room reflected her refined taste. Cherry wood furniture, leather-bound law books lining built-in shelves, and framed diplomas that traced a journey from public school through Harvard Law. The robe was a concession to others' expectations, a slight compromise in the more significant battle for acceptance and respect. Tonight was different. She was heading to the annual Judges Association dinner, where she would receive the Distinguished Service Award for her work in judicial reform. The speech she'd prepared sat in her leather portfolio, its words carefully chosen to inspire change without alienating those who needed to hear its message most. She'd chosen a simple but elegant black top, wanting to arrive at the venue early to help coordinate the evening's proceedings. The garment was Donna Karan, expensive but understated, another careful balance between presence and perception. As chair of the association's diversity committee, she'd worked tirelessly to make the judiciary more representative of its community, understanding that true justice required perspectives from all walks of life. Her Mercedes purred to life as she pulled out of her driveway in the historic district. With its subtle luxury and quiet authority, the car had been a gift to herself when she received her federal appointment 5 years ago. She rarely spoke about her position, preferring to let her work speak for itself. Her mother, a schoolteacher who'd raised her alone after her father's death, had taught her that genuine respect came from how you treated others, not from titles or possessions. The route to the Grand Plaza Hotel took her through Cedar Grove Avenue, a street she knew well from her early days as a public defender. Back then, she had walked these sidewalks in considerably less expensive shoes, carrying the hopes and fears of clients with few advocates and fewer choices. The neighborhood had changed over the years, becoming more diverse, though some attitudes remained stubbornly rooted in the past, like old trees refusing to bend with new winds. She noticed the police cruiser in her rearview mirror almost immediately. Years of experience, both personal and professional, taught her to be aware of such details. When the lights flashed, she followed procedure perfectly. Signal, pull over, hands visible on the steering wheel. The routine was familiar, though she'd hoped her position might have granted her immunity from such interactions. Hope, she reminded herself, was no match for deeply ingrained prejudice. The interaction started typically enough. License, registration, and insurance, all provided promptly and professionally. But she could sense the shift in the officer's demeanor when he saw her address, the subtle change in his tone when she asked why she'd been stopped. She recognized the look in Reynolds' eyes. She'd seen it countless times in her courtroom, the look of authority challenged by someone they deemed beneath them. What should have been a routine traffic stop was about to become something else entirely, something that would expose the persistence of prejudice in law enforcement and catalyze long overdue change. As she complied with their escalating demands, Judge Thompson's mind was already composing the narrative that would transform this personal indignity into institutional reform. As the woman lay pinned to the ground, a black SUV with government plates screeched to a halt nearby. The vehicle's arrival cut through the tension like a knife, its official presence immediately commanding attention. 2 men in formal attire emerged, moving purposefully toward the scene. Their expressions carried the weight of authority, absolute authority, not the kind that needed a badge to prove itself. "Release her immediately," the taller man's authoritative voice cut through the chaos. Chief Justice William Parker's commanding presence seemed to part the crowd of onlookers physically, his distinguished silver hair and impeccably tailored suit marking him as someone accustomed to being obeyed. Reynolds looked up, his face flushed with anger and the first hints of uncertainty. "Back off! This is a police matter." His voice carried less conviction now, the bravado beginning to crack under the weight of the newcomer's presence. "This police matter involves the wrongful detention of federal judge Maya Thompson, the man announced, displaying his credentials with the practiced flourish of someone used to opening doors with a gesture. "I'm Chief Justice William Parker of the State Supreme Court. You're currently assaulting our keynote speaker for tonight's Judicial Association dinner." The color drained from Reynolds' face as realization dawned. Torres immediately released her grip on Judge Thompson's shoulders, stumbling backward as if burned. Walsh's mouth fell open in shock, his young face registering the full impact of what they'd done. "Federal judge?" Reynolds stammered, his knee still pressing into her back as if his body hadn't caught up with his brain's recognition of the catastrophic error. "Yes, Officer Reynolds," Judge Thompson spoke clearly despite her position on the ground. Her voice carried the weight of years in the courtroom, where her words had sentenced both the guilty and the corrupt. "Now, would you kindly remove your knee from my back? Unless you'd like to add the assault of a federal judge to tonight's list of violations." Chief Justice Parker's voice was cold with controlled fury. "Remove those handcuffs, now." Each word felt like a gavel, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. As Reynolds fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking with the recognition of his career's likely end, Judge Thompson slowly stood, brushing gravel from her clothes with dignity. Her wig was slightly askew, and her elegant black top was dirty from the pavement, but her composure remained unshaken. The gathering crowd had fallen silent, phones still recording every moment, capturing what would soon become a viral symbol of injustice and resilience. "Officer Reynolds," she said, adjusting her wig with the same careful deliberation she'd shown in her mirror just an hour before. "In my courtroom, I've heard countless cases of police misconduct, but I've never expected to become an example myself. Your actions tonight will serve as evidence of why we need systemic change in law enforcement. This incident will be more instructive than 1,000 diversity training sessions." Torres stepped forward, trembling. Her face had lost its trained neutrality, revealing the human beneath the uniform. "Your Honor, I was just following—" "Following orders?" Judge Thompson cut her off, her voice carrying the weight of history. "That excuse wasn't acceptable at Nuremberg, and it's not acceptable here. Each of us is responsible for our own actions. Your badge grants you authority, Officer Torres, but it also demands accountability." Reynolds stood frozen, his career flashing before his eyes. 15 years of unchecked prejudice and abuse of power were about to catch up with him. His face showed the dawning recognition that his actions, so long justified by a system that protected its own, would finally face real consequences. "All three of you will be hearing from the Judicial Review Board," Judge Thompson continued, her voice carrying the weight of her position. "Officer Walsh, your hesitation to participate in this abuse gives me hope. Perhaps you'll remember this moment when faced with similar situations in the future. Sometimes the bravest thing an officer can do is stand up to other officers." More vehicles began arriving. Internal affairs, senior police officials, and media vans drawn by the growing crowd's social media posts. The scene had transformed from a simple traffic stop into a watershed moment for police accountability. The quiet suburban street had become a stage where the ongoing drama of racial injustice and law enforcement reform would play out in national headlines. As Judge Thompson prepared to leave with Chief Justice Parker, she turned to address the officers one final time. Her posture was straight, her dignity intact despite the dirt on her clothes and the lingering marks from the handcuffs. "I was on my way to give a speech about the importance of diversity in our justice system. Thanks to you, I now have a powerful personal example to share. Change doesn't always come easily, but it does come inevitably. Tonight, you've helped me demonstrate why it's so necessary." The incident became national news within hours. The video footage went viral, sparking renewed discussions about racial profiling and police reform. Social media exploded with hashtags and calls for action. Civil rights organizations cited the incident as a perfect example of why reform was needed, while police unions scrambled to distance themselves from the officers' actions. Reynolds and Torres were suspended and investigated, effectively ending their careers. The department was forced to implement new training protocols and oversight measures. Communities nationwide began examining their police departments, asking hard questions about bias and accountability. Though slightly late, Judge Thompson delivered her speech that night, still bearing dust from the pavement on her clothing. The packed ballroom fell silent as she approached the podium, the evidence of her ordeal lending powerful authenticity to her words. She spoke about resilience, the importance of maintaining dignity in the face of injustice, and how actual change requires new laws and attitudes. Tonight, she told the assembled judges, lawyers, and civic leaders, I experienced firsthand what so many people face daily. The difference is I wear a robe that grants me power and protection. Most victims of police misconduct don't have that privilege. As members of the judiciary, we have a sacred duty to ensure that justice is truly blind, not to race, not to status, not to uniform. The story of the cops who arrested a federal judge during a traffic stop became more than just another viral video. It became a catalyst for reform, a testament to the power of composure in the face of prejudice, and a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, would eventually be served. As Judge Thompson finally drove away that evening, the lights of news cameras flashing behind her, she allowed herself a small smile. Her mother had always told her that education and position weren't just achievements but responsibilities. Sometimes a moment of injustice could pave the way for lasting change. Her wrongful arrest had exposed a deep-rooted problem in law enforcement, and now the healing could begin. In her rear-view mirror, she saw Officer Walsh standing alone, watching her car disappear into the night. She hoped he would remember this evening not as a career setback, but as a moment of awakening. Change, she knew, often started with a single person willing to question the status quo. The Mercedes purred smoothly through the night, carrying her toward home and tomorrow's challenges. The Distinguished Service Award sat on the seat beside her, its significance somehow more significant now. Service to justice, she reflected, sometimes meant becoming an unwilling example of injustice. But as long as the example created positive change, the indignity was worth bearing. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, civil rights leaders, and media outlets, all wanting to hear her story. Tomorrow would bring interviews, investigations, and intense scrutiny. But tonight she would sleep knowing that her experiences would help ensure that others might be spared the same treatment. Sometimes justice wore a judge's robes, and sometimes it wore a dirty evening outfit and carried the street dust. But it was justice nonetheless. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment of injustice that catalyzed positive change? How would you have handled yourself in Judge Thompson's position, maintaining such remarkable composure in the face of unwarranted aggression or responding differently? Please share your thoughts on how we can transform personal experiences of discrimination into meaningful reform, and tell us about a time when you stood up against injustice, big or small. Join us for more exciting stories like this one.